Yo, what is up guys? Welcome back to another video. Today I wanted to share a bunch of tips for the competitive playlist so that hopefully a bunch of you guys can get the Recluse at 2100 points. Now the weapon doesn't need much of an introduction. It's an absolute beast when its intrinsic perk is active. Now surprisingly, it's actually really good in PvE and I find myself testing its limits in any activity that I choose. So let's start off with some very basic and general tips. For the most part, playing with the preset fire team is ideal simply because you have the luxury of calling out to one another. I really recommend playing with people within 500 comp points of your score so that you don't run into people that are too high above you. Now this is because you obviously don't want to be playing people at 1k points when you're just jumping into the playlist for the very first time. Another thing to watch out for is the time of day that you're actually grinding. Make sure to play during populated hours within your time zone. Playing super early and late at night is probably a bad idea simply because there won't be as many people in the playlist. This means that matchmaking parameters will expand, potentially matching you against people that are far away from you in terms of location or against people that are way above your current skill level. Take school and work hours into account if you want to play during peak hours when most people are active in the playlist. Now that we've gotten some very basic things out of the way, let's take a look at some potential loadouts and builds that I would personally recommend. Now I won't include weapons like the Not Forgotten or the Mountaintop simply because you likely won't have them. One last thing before I give my recommendations here, sorry in advance for how sweaty some of these suggestions may be. I know that some things I'm recommending are quote unquote cheap, but if you want to win in the comp playlist, you should use whatever you have at your disposal. Now first off, let's talk subclasses. Obviously you want to go for the best and most OP subclasses, so I'm talking Night Stalker, Blade Barrage, Sentinel, and Dawnblade, but really feel free to use whatever you're most comfortable with. These are just some of the recommendations that I would personally make so that you can kind of have an easier time in the playlist. Specifically though, the Night Stalker and Sentinel are the ones that I rate the highest, mostly because the Night Stalker is just flat out broken and the Sentinel is solid plus a suppressor grenade at your disposal. You can really make any subclass work so long as you're skilled enough, but generally I'd recommend staying away from the Golden Gun, the Massive Hammer Titan, and Nova Warp until it gets buffed. Other things you might want to consider abusing in the comp playlist is super mods. Now I personally have never ran more than one super mod on any of my armor as I think it's quite stupid and cheesy, but again, you're not playing comp for honor but rather the SMG. Stack as many of those super mods as you possibly can on your armor and you'll be winning games that you probably have no business winning in the first place. It's sad but true. Now you'll be getting your super before everybody else and that'll sway the match in your favor. Now moving on to character stats, I'd recommend having about 3 or 4 resilience and not more than that. In the comp playlist, you won't find too many benefits of running a higher resilience than 3 or 4. I'd recommend getting as much mobility and recovery as possible. You want to be able to strafe quickly in gunfights and heal quickly when you're injured and retreating. Next up, let's talk about weapons and loadouts and much more importantly, which you should use and which you should avoid in specific game modes. This is actually something that is super important, but it's almost entirely overlooked by most individuals. Now I'll get to that in just a second, but first, here's the pool of weapons that I would recommend. Any god roll snipers or shotguns, this includes Supremacy, Fate Cries Foul, Twilight Oath, and any exotic sniper that you're comfortable with. While for shotguns, this might include Duskrock Blues, the Chaperone, Mindbender's Ambition, or the Retold Tale. For hand cannons, I'd recommend the Luna's Howl, Last Word, Ace of Spades, Thorn, and the Service Revolver. Some other random weapons that are very good and surprisingly can make a big impact in matches are the Wrist Gunner and the Lord of Wolves, and for the most part, any exotic trace serval that you feel comfortable with. In the heavy slot, I'd recommend running the Wardcliff Coil, a good rolled machine gun, or a Sniper/Queenbreaker's Bow. Here are some good weapon loadouts I'd recommend on screen now. Again, feel free to mix and match in whatever way you think would fit your specific playstyle. So back to my original point about using specific weapons in certain game modes. I'd really recommend not using weapons that are reliant on first getting a kill to then be great in game modes that are slow like Countdown and Survival. Those weapons are superb against enemies when they're pushing in bunches and often like Controller Clash, but very poor in others. For this reason, I would avoid weapons like the Service Revolver, Thorn, and Blast Furnace in Countdown, but you could get away with them in Control and Clash. I also would lean more towards using a shotgun during Control or Clash, and a sniper in Countdown or Survival, as getting the initial pick is far more important than anything else. Any weapon can shine so long as you play to its strengths in the correct game mode and its intended environment. Now that we have all that stuff out of the way, let's talk strategy and tips within the comp playlist itself. First, we'll start with general things, then dive deeper into tips specific to certain game modes. I see a lot of players splitting up from their teammates far too often. If you're playing solo, you're already at a disadvantage because you don't have voice comms, so you need to at the very least stick with your teammates. Team shotting sounds like a sweaty thing to aim for, but it's one of the most effective things to do to try and win games. Another thing I see a lot of people doing, especially those that are performing quite poorly, is switching weapons and loadouts between games and sometimes even mid-game. Now this is totally fine if it's a tactical change for your team, but if you're doing it out of frustration, then that's not very smart. Instead of switching constantly pretending like another weapon is going to magically solve your issues, stick with the weapon you are using and just play a more simple and smart game. And a lot of the time that just translates into playing a bit less aggressive and being more alert. Another tip I have is always try taking a peek at your radar whenever you're doing mundane tasks like running in a straight line to get to a certain point in the map, or even when you're simply reloading. If you ever pay attention to high level players during live streams, you'll notice that they're almost always glancing at the radar. Even in intense gunfights and densely packed sections of the map, they always find a time or at least a split second to just take a look at the radar and have a glance. It's important to look at your radar a lot because it's your most valuable tool at locating, predicting, and countering your enemy. I don't want to dive too deeply into all of those things right now, but generally speaking, you can do all of them by simply looking at the radar more often between gunfights. I'd like to also recommend that you assign one or more people on your team to have the role of calling out enemy supers. If you're playing solo, then just get into the habit of doing it anyways. The best way you can do this is by simply pulling out your ghost every single time you spawn in after a death. This will reveal which players on your team and the enemy team have supers and exactly which ones they're utilizing. This is neither here nor there, but I personally think that this feature of seeing the enemy team's supers is honestly pretty cheap and makes the comp playlist a little bit more casual, but that's just my opinion and honestly not really related to the topic of this video. This completely changes the dynamic of the game as you're able to actively prepare for the super usage and sometimes before the player is even ready to use his super. That gives your team a clear advantage as you can place yourself in positions to not only team shot but also bait them into a suppressor grenade. Getting into that habit will also help you understand when you should and shouldn't pop your own super based on what the enemy team has to shut you down. As an example, if the enemy team has a Night Stalker and you have a Sentinel, you have a clear advantage and can feel free to pop yours first or wait to counter his super, while the Night Stalker on the other hand might feel the pressure and decide to wait until after you're done using your super. All of these little things really start to stack up and eventually give you a clear-cut advantage if you know how to actively scan and react to your environment in game. Also, while we're on the topic of supers, I'd really recommend using your super first in respawn game modes if you get it before anyone in the lobby. This shouldn't be too hard, especially if you have all the super mods that I told you to equip already. If you've heard of the snowball effect, well then this is basically it. If you pop a super and effectively kill multiple players on the enemy team, you'll create lots of orbs of light and your teammates can pop their supers once they recycle those orbs, and the process just continues until every single person on your team uses their super and basically runs out. You'll get a massive lead in the game and your enemy will be far behind you guys because they'll be getting their supers as soon as you guys are done using all of yours. So if you ever get your super, way before anybody else in the lobby, make sure to pop it as soon as possible and do not hold on to it. Even if it is a super that you'd like to counter somebody else with, it is better to use it, make orbs, and then let your teammates go off with their supers. The last few tips I'd like to make are specific to Countdown itself. A lot of the time I see really good teams losing to average ones on this specific mode, and usually it comes down to two things. First off, just a lack of communication, and secondly, people playing the game mode for kills and trying to do their own thing rather than working as a team. So obviously the 2 points are connected, but they're a little bit different because for the second option, I usually see one person just being a hero and trying to do everything on his his own and be, I guess, an iron wolf, you know, out there doing solo stuff. And that's not really the thing you want to do in Countdown. This is one of the few modes in Destiny 2 where you should call out exactly what the plan is for each and every single round. On defense, my recommendation is having 2 players go to each bomb site and having 1 sniper on each of the bomb sites, and then they would be hard scoping down the lades and calling out where the enemy team is pushing. Then the other side could rotate over and help out, and basically that would be vice versa. On offense though, you can use several strategies, but usually full on pushing 1 bomb site with 4 players is your best bet. This works because you can overwhelm the defensive team and get the bomb planted before they have a chance to react or even stop your push. But that's basically all I have for today, ladies and gents. I want to thank you all so much for watching the video. I've been getting a lot of requests for comp carries on Discord and PlayStation, and so I wanted to make this video because I don't really have the time to help out each and every single person that asks me. Getting, you know, to 4,000 points or 5,000 points or whatever the person messaging me wants is a little bit ridiculous because that takes a pretty long time, and you should see how many people message me. It's actually quite absurd. So hopefully this video at least helps out some of you guys. If it does, that would really just, you know, fulfill my goal of this video. Obviously, if it does help you out, a like rating will be very much appreciated. Comment down below if you want to see more stuff like this in the future. And specifically, the one thing I wanted to cover is possibly making an entire video just on the ways that I personally utilize the radar. So if that's something that you guys would like to see, let me know in the comments. And as always, guys, thank you for watching. Drop a like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more daily Destiny 2 content. Have yourselves a great day, and I'll see you all later. Peace.